Good evening, everybody. I'm Betsy Fisher-Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University. And welcome to our virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. We are so glad you could join us for our kickoff event of the fall. To those of you new to one of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU's School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic and practical campaign training and facilitate research and, of course, discussions like this on women in politics. And tonight we have the honor of speaking to a trailblazer in the political arena, the first female senator elected to represent the state of Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar. She has written a new book entitled The Joy of Politics: Surviving Cancer, a Campaign, a Pandemic, an Insurrection, and Life's Other Unexpected Curveballs. And she is going to talk to us about all of those curveballs and the lessons learned in her successful career in politics that has included 17 years and counting in the US Senate, and a run, of course, for the White House in 2020, where she came in third in the New Hampshire primary and ended up on Joe Biden's shortlist for VP. And she's also, of course, the chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee. And we are delighted that she could be with us tonight. Before we do start, I want to let everybody know that I'm going to save some extra time for your questions. We have more than 300 folks registered for the event tonight, so I'll save some extra time. So please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and I will get to as many of those as possible. And of course, if you miss any of the discussion or you want to share it with friends, the replay is going to be available on our website or on our Crowdcast site of archived programs. We'll put a link to that, of course, in the chat and distribute it on our social media channels. So with that, Senator, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Betsy. I'm kind of psyched that we're doing a remote book event. Does bring back memories, but also makes it easy for a lot of people to attend. So I am
Exactly. Yeah, and
really
we
honored,
have
and I
a
love
great
what
turnout.
you're doing at AU with the Women on Wednesdays. Couldn't have a better name. Nice
Yeah.
alliteration. Great to be on.
Well, thanks for being part of it, and congratulations on the book. I wanted to start because you finished up this book in January of this year in the aftermath of a very volatile midterm campaign season. And I wanted to ask a question that you ended up actually posing in the book to yourself toward the end, when you write, and I quote, "Why pick this particular moment in time to write a book about the joy in politics?" And you added, as in, how Pollyannish, how dumbheaded, how completely naive can you be, end quote. So tell us how you answered that question.
Well, for me, actually, there is always, I went through a lot, just like America did during the time period of the book, with everything from the pandemic to the divisiveness in the politics. In my case, my husband got seriously sick with COVID, ends up in the hospital. My dad died. But it wasn't that much difference than what a lot of people went through. And then the insurrection and the like. But through it all, I decided, yes, you got to be realistic about the setbacks and lament them, but we need to also rejoice in the comebacks. And America did have a comeback. Our economy's in a comeback, always with its challenges. Our politics, we still had vibrant elections in the midterms, and people really turned out to vote and rejected election deniers. And all those things matter. There is one funny postscript to the name of the book, and some of it's, by the way, Hubert Humphrey was also known as the Happy Warrior. There's a new book on him, by the way, that's out, and by Sam Friedman. And he was always known as the Happy Warrior and talked a lot about the joy of our politics. And that was at an equally hard time, right? In the late 60s, mid 60s, early 60s. And I do think you just have to, as a leader, no matter what field you're in, no matter where you are in your life, it's really important to try to keep your eye on, without being Pollyannish, but on the positive and the accomplishments. But the funny story on the side is that when the book was announced this fall, it happened to be announced the same day as Bernie's book. And my book is called The Joy of Politics. And Bernie's book is called It's Okay to Be Angry at Capitalism. And so Bernie thought this was super funny. And as we got into December, and I was desperately trying to get this Afghan refugee bill done
Yeah.
for these incredible people that have helped our soldiers. And I've got VFW, American Legion, Lindsey Graham is the lead author. And I still was getting obstacles, and I think I will get it done. But I was getting so mad at trying to find a way to get it done, as well as another bill I had, a journalism tech bill. And Bernie kept coming up to me on the floor and looking at me and going, "Where's the joy? I don't see the joy. Where's the joy?" And so part of what I'm doing with this book is answering that question. The joy
Yeah.
and results when everyone had counted us out, and we got the bipartisan infrastructure bill done, and we got the CHIPS bill done, we got the pharma negotiation, something I'd been working on for years, and we voted nearly unanimously to get Finland and Sweden into NATO. All these things happened in like 3 months after years of work, and many of them bipartisan, many of them involving the leadership of the president. And so anyway, there is joy in that, and we got to remember that. And certainly there's joy in helping your constituents when they're at the like last thing. They've tried every agency, they're like their social security check isn't there, or some veteran. I had one guy that he literally lost his leg serving overseas, and then the military said there was no proof he didn't have a leg, and I was able to fix that. So there's endless stories of, I think, for all elected officials at every level of government, of when you actually help someone directly, and that still goes on as a U.S. senator.
Right. I want to show the cover of the book again, because this is, of course, that iconic shot of you announcing your bid for the presidency in, I think it was February of 2019, on a day that was not supposed to have any snow.
No.
But I mean, you sort of embraced that joy there, freezing with not even any Bernie mittens on, right? And
Yeah.
it really showed kind of, I think, the grit and the theme of your campaign in many ways, right?
Exactly. And for me, like, it wasn't even supposed to snow that day. I was more worried that one of my constituents would get frostbite that was there, or, we'd have some incidents. So we had these little fire pits going. But the snow was just unexpected, and it was this really heavy snow, which showed up on TV, and the media covered it like a train wreck ready to happen. And I literally, as I turned the pages of the speech, and they were covered in plastic, there was so much snow that I would have to wipe them off. It was coming down so fast as I went through it. And one of the more amusing stories I told from that day was the woman who has colored my hair for years. She decided to come out before, and she was in that a little warm-up tent, and she was there, and she cut my hair, and she was there. So she's out there, and she later tells me a few weeks later, she's like, "I was just out there praying." And I'm like, "Oh, B, it's going well, actually. We have a good start. Like, you don't have to pray." She goes, "No, no, no. I was praying because you didn't notice, but I saw a little gray coming in your part, and I put a bunch of brown stuff in there, and I was worried with all that snow that it was going to come dripping down your face on national TV." Now, it's also kind of a predictive. It later happened to Rudy Giuliani. We don't know.
I was going to say.
But that was because of heat, I think. But anyway, that was just, it was so joyful to have, actually, my dad was still there before he died. My family, Abigail and John were up there, and just so many Minnesotans turned out in the middle of a blizzard. They literally were pulling their kids on sleds, thousands of people. So it was a pretty magical way to begin a campaign. And as you said, we never had as much money as opponents, didn't have the name ID, but we just kept going and really surprised people in terms of how we built the campaign with a great team, and also how we were able to focus, I think, correctly on issues that are still really relevant today, and many of which we've been working on the last few years.
Well, and of course, another hair story, you write about Trump dubbing you the snow woman. And then I think you replied on Twitter, "Well, how would your hair fare in a blizzard?"
Exactly, which I don't think the answer was not very well. But yes, I wrote that myself in the airport.
But that gets me to like the question of, and you write candidly about this, the kind of the thick skin that it takes to run for office, along with, acknowledging that possibility of failure. And I think, maybe even more so for women. Talk about that decision to run in what admitted was kind of a long shot race, and your decision to sort of take that risk.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it was I felt that I had some important things to say and important
Mhm.
issues to focus on. I come from the middle of the country, and I think that for the first time, the public was able to see not just one or even two women on the stage. We literally tripled the number of women in the any primary Democrat Republican combined on two consecutive debate nights. Like that was it. And we had all these women, including
Yeah,
Kamala.
here's all the women.
Yeah. And that was just, those are those two nights. Oh, cool. Look at that photo.
Yeah, of all the
Um,
debates.
and it was just a major shift, and it makes people think differently, even when you put in the hat in the ring, like, wait, look, not everyone's the same. They have different views. They look different. They come from different places. And I thought that was really, really important, but that wasn't the core of why I ran. I ran just because I thought I'd be a good president. And I thought I could get things done. And one of the unique things we did like 100 things we were going to get done in the first 100 days. We were very forward looking, which I think, given those years of Donald Trump, people really needed to hear about. And but overall, it was very unique that we had all the women. I mean, you remember the days when Hillary was running, and she couldn't even make it to the bathroom and back because they hadn't planned it. Remember that one debate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and
And
you
so
pointed out too that
right,
those six women, in history, there had never been more than five, ever having
right,
appeared on a
exactly.
debate stage.
Yeah,
And
so that
and so
was
do you think about, I mean, you sort of alluded to this, but that kind of imaging to young girls, I think of even Elizabeth Warren and the messaging that she gave about young girls, that's gonna pay off here. And when we think about more women in politics and maybe having a woman president.
right. Because remember, it's not all about president, it's also about people running, and that's how you get started at school board and city council and on up. And I was the first woman elected to Senate Minnesota. I was the first woman county attorney in our biggest county. And so I've had that history of knowing that it makes a difference when they see you in those jobs. And I've had just incredible, as all women in elected office have, regardless of party, experience of people coming up and saying, I was an intern, and now I'm doing this in politics. Or I did this. And
Yeah.
it's really cool to see that happen. I remember when I had my first elected job as county attorney, I hired two women deputies, and they'd never had a woman for our biggest county in that job, DA. And then here I have these two women deputies who we go out to lunch, and we're sitting there, and this waiter comes over and he says, how are you they had never met each other, so we're like planning this. How are you three little gals doing? Are you taking a break from work? And I'm like, no, I am woman county attorney. These are my two deputies. We're going to be running the biggest law enforcement office in the state. Do you have any other questions? But I do think over time that has improved, but it's still,
Yeah.
it's a quarter of the women in the Senate. I remember being on the Trevor Noah show and a few years ago. He's very funny, and I was going through how at that moment in time in the history of the Senate there'd been 2,000, almost 2,000 men, and like at the time like 56 women, and half of them were there at that moment. And he
Mhm.
pauses, he goes, if a nightclub had numbers that bad, they'd shut it down. And
So true.
but we're not shutting down the doors, we're opening. You had Speaker Pelosi, and you have women leaders emerging all over the place. So I think that has been a major shift, and I think the
Yeah.
women that are coming up that are maybe watching this today have more role models than certainly I did. I had when I was running for county attorney. No, maybe it was when I was running for Senate. No, county attorney. I had Janet Napolitano, maybe was the AG, and Kathleen Sebelius was the governor of Kansas. And I saw on their website that they had all these like plans and goals. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have my plans. And this woman who advises women on running for office, she had came up with this like great line. When you're a women candidate, you have to, now some of this isn't true anymore, speak softly and carry a big statistic off of speak softly and carry a big stick, because men can sometimes go, hey, I did this.
Yeah.
Women have to actually show um, the numbers and showed what they did. And that's what I did through my time in politics. I made sure that I got things done and showed results. My reelection for county attorney, I remember the shirt said something like, action results, or, all of this. It was all about results, because oftentimes you just can't run on image or on looking cool.
Right. This is my favorite picture from the debates, though, which is just kind of, the perfect illustration of sort of our situation sometimes in politics. The
Yes,
guys are screaming at the top of their lungs, and you're sitting there in the middle of it all, right?
yes, that was a great, great memory, though they were debating about some kind of prison issues. And one of the funny backstories is maybe you're, because you maybe don't want to end up, with someone punching in your face because they're yelling at each other. Especially you see how close Dyer is there.
Yeah.
So you normally might react by stepping back some. But at that point, at the end, I think Elizabeth and I were the only two women left on that stage. And Pete and I were the only two of average height, honestly. And so I was the only one that used a little like 2-inch riser, so I didn't look so short. So if I had backed away, it's one thing to get on the riser at the beginning.
Oh,
The
yeah.
other two in the middle of the debate sort of stumble off the riser. And so I chose to just stay where I was. And that was why that picture took place, where I'm just standing right there in the middle of, they yelled at each other. Yes, that happened.
You didn't want to have remember the Gary Bauer moment when he was like flipping pancakes in New Hampshire and fell off the back
Yes,
of the
those kinds of things.
stage?
You do try
It's
to
like,
avoid, man
avoid,
or woman, you try to avoid those moments. Yes.
avoid those moments. But going back to, you talked about running for Senate, for in that first race of yours, and kind of results driven. You write about, you had a team of volunteers with going through the parades in the streets with brooms, to symbolize kind of sweeping in change. But talk about that decision, because you were, certainly very young. You hadn't been run statewide before.
Right.
I mean, look at your daughter there, how tiny she is.
Yeah.
But talk about that decision to run, and was there folks that encouraged you to do that? What was your support system, and how did you kind of take that leap?
Yeah, so I was, as you know, at the county attorney now. It was about that particular county was about the fourth of the population of the state. So, it was the biggest one by far. And I had about 400 people working for me, high profile jobs, so people knew me. It was 2 congressional districts, so it wasn't quite what it sounded. And I had done it for 8 years and been involved in, we prosecuted a judge who ripped off a woman with disabilities, like a lot of high profile things. And so I was known, but I hadn't, as you know, I hadn't been in the legislature, I hadn't been in Congress. Actually, the job I had was nonpartisan on the ballot, even though I was Democratic endorsed. But I actually had seen what we had done. Like, as I said, we had these plans, and I'd have numbers, and I'd show what we did, how I've been taking way too long to do some cases involving repeat property offenders and all this stuff. And I was able to show the numbers and get results. And maybe it was naive, but I thought, well, we need some of that in Washington. And this is what I want to bring there. And I want to do this. Now, Walter Mondale was my mentor, because he had a former vice president who's beloved. I had worked with him at my law firm for years. So I remember calling him with the reasons why I was running, and he wanted a 30-second elevator speech. And so I would call him and I'd give him the 30-second elevator speech. He goes, that's not good enough. And he'd hang up.
Wow.
And then I'd try again. And so I want to stress again that having those kinds of mentors is really, really important. So it was a leap, but I don't think it was as big a leap. Maybe it seemed like for people in Washington, they're like, who is she? I can't pronounce her name. I call people for money. One August, just like the last month we had in the year and a half before the election, no one would call me back. No one could pronounce my name. And I finally actually resorted to looking through all my phone numbers from the past. Back then we had, address books, and
Right.
finding all the numbers of everyone I ever know. And that is when I set what is still an all-time Senate record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends.
That's
And
so great.
as my husband has pointed out, it's not an expanding base. And so it is a lesson to everyone to try to keep good relations, when relationships end. But I it seemed like not as big a leap as I've said in Minnesota, but probably for national people, they're like, what is this? And then I did well in the debates. We had a number of Democrats running. I went all over the state. I got the endorsements of a number of greater Minnesota outstate members of Congress. That was important. And I learned a lot about ag policy and just a
Mhm.
lot of things that put me in the place. So that was my other advice, actually, in addition to having thick skin, being ready for crazy, weird things happening and people going after you. The other thing is just to know your stuff. And you don't
Right.
have to, there's this old thing about women candidates think they have to know everything. And I tell the funny story in the book about how a legislator was recruiting two people to run in a swing district. And the woman said, I don't think I can do this. I don't know enough about trade policy. And the man said, well, I drive a Volvo that was made in America, so I know enough. I can do it. I think there is that gender difference on that, but at the same time,
Mhm.
and maybe because of that, for me, I felt like I really better know my stuff, especially when I wasn't in federal office. So I just
Right.
learned everything so that when I announced, and I kind of just did it a few hours every day, and so that when I announced, I felt I could handle most questions. And then, of course, I did more and more, and I used the same approach. But by the time I ran for president, I've been in the Senate for a number of years. So I felt like I was pretty up to speed on the issues, but I would always just keep going back and looking at new things. And that you're better at governing if you know things, right? So the
Right.
campaigns
Right.
are a way to learn things to govern.
I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of a funny illustration of a larger point, but you tell the story in the book, just about, the treatment that women generally will have in the media. And this is you tell this story in the book, and this is a selfie that you took at the inauguration on, right at, on the, dais of the inauguration, a selfie with McCain and Bernie Sanders. And this was in 2017, right? So it was the Trump inauguration. And then, the next day, the caption, someone took a news photographer took a photo of you taking the selfie. And the caption is "Woman takes selfie" with McCain and Sanders. And,
Yeah,
this is the kind of thing that you just want to scream about, right? It's the
exactly.
senator there taking a selfie.
Yeah. So that was pretty funny because that thing went viral the next day. Because remember,
Yes.
the day after the Trump inauguration was the Women's March. So
Yeah.
there were all these things of retweeting it with the words, "This is why we march." And so that was quite memorable. And but the other piece of it was that moment is that somehow I end up, and they were both friends of mine from different walks of life, sitting between Bernie and John McCain, if you can imagine. Bernie, both of them having run for president, all three of us basically talking about it beforehand about how that, because you remember McCain just predicted all of this
Oh,
about
yeah.
Trump. And there we're just like, we got to do our jobs here. And on inauguration, you try to come together. And just the darkening clouds were such a metaphor for what the speech was. It just got darker and darker. And McCain, who Trump had gone after for being a prisoner of war, if you remember this, saying he shouldn't have got caught or whatever, he shouldn't. And I still remember helping McCain because of his injuries from his when he was held as a prisoner of war, and the beatings and the torture, he couldn't even get on his raincoat ever. And I knew this. Couldn't comb
Mm,
his hair. So I was
right.
helping him put that on, while Trump is speaking. And McCain, always irascibly hilarious at times, as the people are filing up there, and Bernie is just like, and John is whispering to me, "This is setting an all-time record for the inauguration." I go, "For what?" He goes, "Most money ever spent on plastic surgery on an inaugural stage."
Oh, God.
Yes. And so then as it goes on, he starts citing, because he was such a student of history, he
Yeah.
knew he knew what lines from the speech where they reminded him of past speeches. And I wish I had written it all down, because he actually said the speeches and the years. But I remember he said Mussolini and he said Huey Long, and he was like going over dictators or
Yeah, it wasn't Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln.
no. And so he was
Yeah.
saying that. And then when it ended, the three of us walk out together, and usually find something, because everyone's done this in politics after inauguration, like, well, I'm
Yeah.
not sure. But this time we were just kind of speechless. And a reporter asked us stuff, and we hardly said anything at all, just because it was so dark. And if any hope that you had that maybe this would be a
Yeah.
moment, he didn't even mention Hillary's name in the
Right.
speech. So anyone that thought, well, she's sitting there behind him showing respect by being there. So anyone that thought it was going to be this cathartic moment, that was the first sign. And the second, of course, was the
Hmm.
speech he gave in front of the CIA wall of um, of the um, the agents that had died. That doesn't have their names; they were
Right.
just stars. And he
Right.
gave a political speech about the size of the inaugural crowd the next day. And so that was after that. I'm like, wow. So
Well, and the irony
as
of the
if I
picture
didn't
too is
know
that,
going in.
yeah,
Huh?
the irony of that, the photo is that fast forward 4 years later, right? And you, as ranking member on the Senate Rules Committee with Chairman Blunt, was the actual MC of the entire inauguration.
Right, exactly. So you
It
have
was like,
that. The other
it was,
irony is, leading into that, only a week before, McCain had invited me with Lindsey Graham and the three of us,
yeah.
because he wanted to show his support for Georgia and for Latvia, Lithuania, and for Ukraine and Estonia. And we spent a New Year's Eve before that inauguration, John and Lindsey and me, on the front line with the previous president of Ukraine, in the middle of this blizzard, because I'm always in blizzards, with people who had been widows of soldiers that had been the victim of sniper fire from Russia. Now,
Mm,
McCain picked to do that. He wanted to do that trip to show our support for those countries, because he knew and felt that Trump would be too aligned with Putin.
mm,
So, I mean, talk about everything coming around and him predicting,
for sure.
which a lot of people did, but McCain, I think, had unique knowledge and was a very, very close friend of mine, as is Bernie. So it was
Yeah.
more to the picture than even the crazy thing that came out. Yes.
Well, I also wanted to ask you too about the decision that you made to take yourself out of the running for VP. I mentioned at the beginning that you were on that short list. After Biden as the nominee had said that he wanted to select a woman for the role, and you were interviewed. You tell a great story about prepping for the interview, reading all the Biden books. It was a Zoom interview. But it had to be,
Because of
a
the
tough
pandemic.
decision for
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, to, after all of this, to decide to kind of step back from that. Talk about that
Well,
decision.
if you remember, the moment in our country was after the George Floyd murder in my state.
Right.
It was this moment in time, and I really felt strongly that when Trump was, that numerous examples, which we all know, but we're also in the book, just about how he was dividing the country based on race, that he was doing all he could to use that issue, that it was a moment to bring the country together by putting a woman of color on the ticket, which is what I said to now President Biden. And so that was what happened. And, I remember afterwards, my husband and I, after all that, the presidential, my husband almost dies of COVID.
Mm.
Then we have the murder of George Floyd in my state, then this. And I start the book by talking about how then in July, he and I took a drive out to the Tetons where I'd gone growing up in Wyoming, and took this really, really long hike, and just sort of reflecting on everything that had gone down. And one of the things was because I just had my hip replaced, whole nother story, right before they stopped elective surgeries because I had this condition, and I got it replaced. And 4 months later, I'm on this hike, and it started to hurt so much when I got to this 14-mile round trip hike. I get to the top. We're supposed to be Lake Solitude, and I tell the story of sitting on. I finally say to my husband, I'm not going to do the last 20 minutes. I'm just going to stay here. It's really nice here. The mountains are beautiful. I'll stay. You go up, you come down. And he's so used to me meeting every goal because I'm so competitive, big surprise. And he goes, no, you should go. I'm like, no, I'm going to sit on this rock. And so there I am, like kind of feeling sorry for myself, honestly. My hip, eating this granola and with this blue scarf around my neck. And then these two kind of older people come up and they're really vigorous with their poles, and I hear them crunching on the ice. And because I was afraid I was going to like go down the ice, honestly. So they come crunching up and they're like, did you just stop here? Are you okay? I'm literally alone on a rock. I go, oh yeah. I said, I just got my hip replaced 4 months ago. And they go, the woman goes, it's extraordinary you're up this far. And I go, thank you. Yeah, isn't it kind of amazing? She goes up, then these two kids come down, and this young boy, it's like he takes like the snow off his boots and he goes, lady, did you stop here and not go up to the lake? I go, yeah, it's really nice around here. And he goes, that's so cool. It's really overrated up there. It's covered in ice. It's much better here. So the whole lesson of that story was that it's what you learn on the journey. It's not always that you get to the top. Not everyone does, but it's what you learn on the path, on the journey.
Right.
I hope that I've taken those lessons, both the defeats and the positives, from the presidential, and put them into action with the work I did, as you point out, on democracy, with working with Senator Blunt and Senator Collins and Senator Manchin on the Electoral Count Act that we passed, on leading the Freedom to Vote Act, that was so important, on the work that I've just done in general on elections. I think a lot of that has come out of these last few years, as well as using the power that I got out of the presidential to help my candidates that I like all around the country. I think last Congress I was #1 for bipartisan bills and #3 for passing bills, which sometimes when you get out of a presidential race, it's not quite like that. But
Right.
I was able to be true to myself in that campaign, and then being able to make that adjustment to doing something else instead of crying in my milk all the time, and try to do good.
Well, we have several questions, and a lot of them have to do with women running for office. So I'll start with a couple of those. This one is from Alexis, and she is asking, have you ever felt that you needed to act more masculine to
Huh.
get people to take you seriously?
Huh. So I think I will say, where I'm thinking back now, because sort of you get used to how you're going to be as time goes on. But when I was basically the district attorney for 8 years, I would be at these really hard meetings, press conferences about murder cases. The victims would come up, and it's just horrific stories of, kids seeing their mom beaten to death, and I would just always be like, I am not crying. I will not cry because I have to be strong. And I don't think that was a weak thing to do. I think part of it was trying to be strong for the people who were crying. And so I would work. But then what was wild about it was every time I went to a funeral, even when it was for like, I remember we had one domestic violence victim who, her husband was from Russia, and he dismembered a body. It was a horrible, horrible thing. And it was horrible. Just the story of it. She had a daughter, and her daughter was really like little, I don't know, 3 or 4. And she had an identical twin sister in Russia. And when they went to meet the grandma and her at the airport, the daughter ran up to her and hugged her and said, "Mommy," because she
Mm,
was an identical twin, and her mom was dead from this. So
mm,
at the funeral, there was no one there. There was like 5 people there. So we would often do things like that. And so what I found out was when I realized whenever I went to funerals, either with either people I didn't know or it was like I would just cry the whole time, just because I could never cry otherwise. So
ugh,
and or if it was like 90-year-olds who had lived a good life that I did know, I would still cry, and I was like, geez. But I think part of it was I worked so hard not to cry at
yeah,
every single thing because I felt that was part of it. I think that the other thing is I was always, I think part of this was because I was the first woman that ran for Senate. It was unbelievable. I don't think this would happen today. Newspaper editors in small towns would say, "Can a woman win?" Because we'd had 2 women lose for Senate who were both qualified in the years before I ran. And they literally say, "Do you think a woman could win?" And I
I feel
finally,
like we had that after Hillary
well,
lost, right?
it still goes on, but this
Yeah,
correct. And it went on, I think, in our presidential. I note that I think a lot of
yeah,
we had this like huge headwind that people thought a woman couldn't beat Donald Trump. It was in their heads
right.
when we were all running. And so but I still, I don't think I'd ever do this now. But I finally couldn't figure out. I'd be at these audiences, all these men, they kind of be like this. And I'd be like, up especially in the rural parts of our state. And I finally was asked this, can a woman win, like in front of all of them? And I came up with this
Mhm.
answer and I just go, look, yeah, no, I'm not running as a woman. I'm running on my record and what I did and how I changed things and got things done as county attorney. I'm running on the strength of my ideas. Because if I was just running as a woman, and it makes no real sense. If I was just running as a woman, I mean, half the voters are men, and then I wouldn't win. And the men all go, yeah. So I think part of it was kind of acknowledging you're not just running to be the woman senator,
Right,
you're
right.
running for other things. So, and I still think it's a lesson to think about sometimes when you just double down on that so much of the first this, the first that, and then it starts making them think, is that the only reason you're doing this?
Yeah.
And that's a legit question to ask, I think. And so I think that was part of my success with them. And then my last story, I was at a steelworker event with a bunch of retired steelworkers, and there's this woman who raised her hand and she said, "My name is Rose Bradovich, and I've never voted for a woman before because I think they should be home with their kids. But in your
Oh.
case, I'm making an exception." And then every month she sent me $10, Rose Bradovich, in a little envelope. But the funniest part is years later, I met the mayor, a woman, they had a woman mayor in that town. She goes, "Yep, that was the day I realized Rose Bradovich had never voted for me." Anyway, we're
Um, okay, let's see. We got a couple more here. This is a question from Anna, and she said, for girls who want to get involved in things like politics and change making, where would you recommend them to start?
well, and this is for younger. I think just getting involved in any campaign is a good thing.
Mhm.
And I just remind people, it does not have to be a presidential. It
Mhm.
can be on a city council race. My first one, I ran for a volunteer. I was a volunteer. So a city council race in the suburbs. And I learned all this stuff about putting up lawn signs and, where you want to do things, Main Street corners. That guy was fine. He ended up winning. And then he moved to Florida. It's like a year later, he just left. So like I'm only telling that story because it wasn't really that glamorous of a thing, but I learned from it. Then you
Yes.
can pick candidates that don't move to Florida, actually. I did like a reelect for a legislator. This was all volunteer stuff because I was a
Yeah.
lawyer, I had student loans. So I was doing this as a volunteer. And then I got involved in a policy group that would talk about different policy ideas for Democrats and ended up heading it up eventually. So I just think and then I did a bunch of volunteer things that weren't political too. I think that you gotta not always think about the biggest race because sometimes you learn the most when you're doing some of the smaller things and then you move up. Now, it's also fun, obviously, to be part of a
Right.
bigger race. You can do both things, but I think that kind of thing is really important. Or get involved in an issue campaign of some
Yeah.
kind that you care about, and then that can lead. I get concerned that if we just have people that think politics is yucky because it's so divisive and everything, and it's not
Mhm.
easy right now, I will admit it. Although I just got a text from a Republican senator who's a woman who's going to come over and have a drink with me when I'm done with this. So,
Nice.
I mean, it's like there's a lot, especially in the Senate, there's a lot of
Yeah.
friendships that are there. However, I think that despite the yuckiness of it, that if people just get so turned off that good people don't want to run, especially in these
Yeah.
local, school board things, which we know are so important, and that's bad. So people just are going to have to shoulder it. Find people you agree with. They might even be, especially at the local level, sometimes, depending on the district, in suburban areas, rural areas, they might even be from the different party. But if you can find people who want to actually go into this for good, and they want to actually govern and get things done. I mean, there is,
Yeah.
as I go back to the theme, there's a joy in that when you find some common ground and ways to do this, as opposed to people who just want to disrupt and dismantle our government and representative democracy.
Well, along those same lines, there's a question here from Caleb about the strategies that you think are the most effective for kind of bridging the political divide and
Mhm.
fostering bipartisanship
Sure.
on issues. And I would add to that, maybe, if you think, you mentioned a Republican, female senator, if you feel that your colleagues, the other women in the Senate are particularly more apt to sort of come together in a
Yeah.
bipartisan fashion to get
So,
things done.
yeah, I mean, the women in the Senate, they even did a study at Harvard that showed we were more likely to be on each other's bills
Right.
and work together. And when there was that one shutdown years ago, we hope it's not, prescient for
Yeah.
future. It was actually Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Kelly Ayotte, myself, Jean Shaheen. There were a bunch of us that came together. We let in John McCain, okay, but it was majority women that worked out this agreement at that time. And so, but it's not just women. For me, the way you find
Mhm.
in common ground is issues that you both believe in. I have worked with, everything from Mike Lee on antitrust to working with Senator Kramer over in North Dakota on a firefighter bill. John Thune and I passed a big bill on shipping and supply chains during the pandemic. Um, and then you have just people you get to know from things so they trust you. Whether it is that women's senators group, whether it's the prayer breakfast group, whether it is just from Midwestern for me, or my little, surrounding states. I tend to work with them a lot. That you can find common ground on things. So, you know, Dan Sullivan's a big Bono fan. You might not have known that, the senator from Alaska. And we were at the Munich Security Conference once and got to have dinner with Bono. Then that led us to go to the concert with Dan and his wife, and meet with Bono again ahead of time. I actually end my
This
book
is
with,
not a hardship assignment you had there.
no, 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 that one was fun. Yes, like there are some fun things, but the point is that you find things that
Yeah.
you can work with together, whether it's common interests, whether it's just basic friendships, trust. It's really surprising on foreign aid. Some of the senators who are actually more conservative, who were involved in the prayer breakfast, they tended to be stalwarts over in the past on the foreign aid issue. And Roy
Mhm.
Blunt and I have worked together on numerous things, including not just the inauguration, but on the Electoral Count Act reforms, on tourism, we headed up the adoption caucus, and is and was a really, really good friend that I trusted, and I think that made a huge difference
Mhm.
when we were able to work together during that nightmare of January 6th. And he was able to talk down some of the Republicans from objecting when we were all in that room, knowing we had to get this done before the sun rose. That after this insurrection, Americans didn't see us divided on the electoral count. It would have lasted for days if he hadn't done that. And I worked with him to get it all sorted out, get people together. Or 2 weeks later, when we did that inauguration, there were a bunch of people that wanted to have it underground in a bunker. And we just
Right.
both felt, as did President Biden, that that was wrong. And so when you think of Amanda Gorman, the youngest inaugural poet ever, in her bright yellow coat and the snow coming
Mhm.
down, I mean, we wouldn't have had that moment, and we wouldn't have had that joyous moment of
Right.
Lady Gaga robustly singing the Star Spangled Banner and pointing to the flag and saying, and our flag was still there. Those things happened, Garth Brooks with Amazing Grace, because Roy and I stood tall together, and we convinced the center to
Mhm.
get all these security briefings, and that this was run by a different group in a different way. And so those things are, they maybe they're not things that you do that take years to get done, but they're in the moment decisions that have to be based on trust, that you're going to do this together, you're going to take responsibility for something together, and you're going to together convince your colleagues that it's the right thing to do.
And now on the Rules Committee, you're the chair, and the ranking member is another woman, Deb Fisher.
Exactly.
And I think on appropriations too, there's Susan
Yeah, there's
Collins and
Susan
Patty Murray,
Collins
right?
and Patty Murray have done incredible
Yeah.
work in getting through all these appropriation bills. So we've had a number of examples. Deb was actually asked me to be her Democratic mentor when she got to the Senate. She's a Republican senator from Nebraska,
Uh-huh.
so we've worked together a lot, and we've had some really good hearings. We had the first joint oversight hearing with the House of Representatives of the police, along with our Republican counterparts, the Capitol Police, this summer, as well as our whole security apparatus after we made some major changes. We're working on some of the AI issues together, which is really
Hmm.
important for the future in elections. And as I noted, we shepherded, well, when Roy was there, but with Deb's help, shepherded through the Electoral Count Act reform.
We have a question. You'll like this question. This is from Grace. She says, as a Minnesotan myself, I see the great strides our state is making, from universal school lunch to ensuring protected access to abortion. What lessons do you think Congress can take from Minnesota?
Very good. Well, our governor has done a great job, and people have really focused on getting things done there. And I think one of the things, the school lunch, I'm a big fan of that, knowing what was going on in some of our rural areas. But I think one of the things I haven't talked about yet, what that question leads me to, is
Yeah.
just a protection of a woman's decision to make her own decisions about her health care. That Dobbs decision, I think, just rocked our country. People had just taken things for granted. And when you look at not just what happened in Minnesota, where we're an island of healthcare, and that clinics have now closed down, a clinic in North Dakota and moved over across the Red River to Minnesota. Um, but in states like Kansas and Ohio, the state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, you've just seen voters turn out in unprecedented numbers to say, no, we want women to be able to make their own decision about their health care, not politicians. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it really has perhaps taken some of our Republican colleagues by surprise. I don't know why, but it's really been an extraordinary outpouring, and continues to be, because of the just wrongness of that decision. And whether it's a 10-year-old in Ohio that gets raped and victim and then can't get health care and has to go over to another state, or whether it is a student, whether it is whatever it is, people have started to see this is just not the America that I want to live in. And so it's that, I think, has been a dramatic change, not just in Minnesota in terms of the people not taking it for granted anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but throughout the country.
Stephanie is asking, she says, greetings from Atlanta. She said, will we see a woman president in your lifetime? What's it going to take?
Well, I actually remember on the campaign trail saying if it would be easy, we could play a game called on the debate stage, Name Your Favorite Woman President. Oh, guess what?
Exactly.
We can't. And so we now have Kamala Harris as our vice president, first woman vice president. And I think we will see a woman president. I can't tell you when. I'm supporting President Biden, of course, as he seeks reelection. But I think we will. It just, when you look at other countries have had countries that have much less of an electoral history, a democracy history than we do, have had women in charge. So, and many of them doing really quite good jobs. And so my hope is that we will see that. Yes.
Um, Susan is asking if you would share your personal experience on January 6th.
Mhm. So maybe some of you have seen the January 6th hearings and the video of Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and others that day. There was actually another room, which was a room where Senator Blunt and I were basically in charge, and that was everyone else in the Senate. So what happened was Roy and I worked together leading up to that. We know we had about 90 out of 100 senators voting to uphold the Electoral College. We were concerned. We didn't know there'd be an insurrection by any point, but we were concerned that this was going to take a day to 2 days, and I warned our colleagues. I had is anything with pomp and circumstance type things where we walk with the electoral ballots in these mahogany
Mm-hmm.
boxes that are held by three pairs of young women. Um, that day, I was very focused on the speaking order, and I was speaking after Ted Cruz, who was objecting. It was Senator Schumer and McConnell, and then I believe, then he was objecting, and then I was going next. And that was all before the insurrection started. And I actually said that day that I called the people that were voting to uphold the votes the coup fighters, not knowing that this was going to happen because the other side of it was so dark. And so we did that. Then all of a sudden, as everyone knows, the Pence is let out. He was presiding over the Senate, and then we were taken to this other room. And I remember Tim Scott got up, and there was a prayer, and then Roy and I got up, and we said I had talked to Chuck, he had talked to Mitch, and that no matter what happened, that we were going to be going back that night, and everyone cheered. We were taking back our chamber, because at that point you could see the insurrectionists on the TVs that were in this room that
Right.
were that showed them. Then the day goes on, and I remember, we working on these objections. We're talking to Chuck and Mitch that are in the other room. We're giving the senators reports of what's happening. And then an officer came in and said, someone, I still don't know who, had put up a picture of us in that room that was on Facebook. And you could kind of tell, they said, the officer did, what the room was. He had all these cuts on his face, and they kept having me make announcements. I get up there and I'm like, do you want to have your face look like his face? Because we don't have enough officers here right now, which wasn't public because it was just chaos, of
Right.
course. And I said, so we've got 90 of the senators here, and take that Facebook page picture down right now. I still don't know who it was, but they all thought I knew who it was, so I guess that was good. And so then other things happened. We didn't have enough food, so I instructed, after the insurrectionists had left, but they hadn't cleared the building, I took in some staff members and some of the cops, and I'm like, you got to go in the Dirksen cafeteria. I don't care, we'll deal with it later, but I need you to basically take food out of there. Use those hospital things. One thing I didn't say in the book that I said, I go, if those glass doors, because I was worried the senators were going to leave and it wasn't safe, and they hadn't eaten for
Right.
like 6 hours. And as my husband notes, they were not the age to pull an all-nighter. And so I'm like, if you can't get in those glass, if you can't get in the glass doors where those salads and sandwiches are, I go, just break the glass. You have my permission, but don't get any glass in the food. So they came up like a half hour. They had the food, and I still remember a very prominent senator, who I will not reveal, eating a big sandwich and said to me, "How did you get this selection?" You don't want to know.
It
So
was your
then
great paper.
we all go back, and then we have these really dramatic speeches. If you ever want to see
Mm-hmm.
something, watch the speeches Democrats and
Mm-hmm.
Republicans made about upholding our democracy that night. And so that we have a set order, we talk down multiple objections, and by 4 in the morning, everyone's gone home except Vice President Pence, who was talking about it on their debate stage, Vice President Pence and Senator Blunt and me, and the three pairs of women with these mahogany boxes, and of course, security and
Mm-hmm.
staff. And we walk this time, not with a celebration with the whole Senate following us, but we're going over broken glass. We've got spray painted pillars. And then we end up in the House where a number of reps were there. Speaker Pelosi was there. And then we went through all the ballots and we got to the end to Wyoming. And then we announced that Biden and Harris had won. I did it, and then actually Vice President Pence did it as well, made that announcement. And then Roy and I walked back, and he said we should go down and look at these, the parliamentarians' office, which they had targeted first. They targeted the inaugural platform, the parliamentarians' office, because they literally wanted to steal the ballots. And they had just, I remember seeing one of the dearly beloved parliamentarian members of staff, her family picture broken on the floor. And we just looked, and Roy and I walked out, the sun's coming up, and I remember in his understated way, he's like, well, I'll see you in the morning. Gonna have a lot of work to do. I go,
Wow.
yeah. And so then we started planning the inauguration at that next day, which we had, of course, doing for a year, but this was like, we had to now plan it in light of all of this.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I guess as the last question, you had mentioned in the book, you said at the end, you say, I go forward with this job with a spring in my step to a tune that's not yet finished. So I guess I'll ask you sort of, what's your next tune? Do you think you'll make another run for the presidency?
Well, as I said, I'm supporting President Biden. I'm actually running for my Senate reelection, and that's what I'm focused on. I'm in leadership in the Senate, and there's the obvious big things that we need to do on everything from workforce training and, in my mind, immigration reform, because no great nation has it expanded with the shrinking workforce, and the work that we need to do on climate and so many other things. And including what's right in front of us, the farm bill, the defense bill, other things. But I still find that joy in accomplishments for people at home. I think I visited 27 counties and working with my colleagues. I was happy to see them when I got back yesterday. And
so would you want to succeed Schumer as leader?
Oh, I am running for Senate reelection. Chuck Schumer is doing a great job as leader, and everything is good in the world. All right.
Well, Senator, we really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing all of your wisdom and lessons and your encouragement for other women in politics. And we appreciate everybody watching tonight, and we will stay in touch with you all on some other Women on Wednesday events we have coming up this semester. But thanks again for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you.